Week 6 of fantasy football is now in the books. We are back. Last week, we had to skip this because it was Canadian Thanksgiving, but we are breaking down our biggest fantasy football reactions, some of the biggest lessons that we learned this past week, some Dynasty Trades submitted by you guys over on Twitter and in the Discord as well. And then we'll go through our early waiver ads, a couple guys that we're going to be keeping an eye on for this coming week heading into week 7. So I'm excited. I mean, this was a really wonky week of fantasy football and real life NFL football, and we'll touch on that in the takeaways a little bit. But there's a lot to discuss for sure. How you doing, Danny?
Doing well. And yeah, like you mentioned, this might be the most unpredictable week of fantasy football I've ever seen on what's already been the most unpredictable season of fantasy football I've ever seen. I have no clue what actually is going on right now in the NFL landscape, because trying to predict what's going to happen week to week is just, it's a losing battle. It's a losing bet.
Yeah, literally. I had the worst week of bets this week for sure. I was 64% on the week, or on the season, sorry, coming in on sharp bets like over-unders and, spreads and stuff like that. And I think I went 5-9 this week so far. So definitely not a good week. And obviously, I lost the 49ers spread because they lost the game outright. The Eagles lost the game outright, who I bet on. Like, just a completely wonky week. So, I mean, we could start it off with, I think the biggest takeaway of the week was that this was the biggest week of injuries, at least in volume, maybe not in significance, but in volume for sure. So far this season. So I am going to go through. I went and watched Dr. Jesse Morris of the Fantasy Doctors did an entire week 6, injury takeaways, and I watched the video and I wrote down the notes. So you guys, I can save you guys from watching that 10-minute video, but definitely go and check it out and support his work regardless. Yep. So let's go through the injuries right now, and I'll tell you kind of what he said and what exactly is going on. So the quarterback position, we had a number of big injuries at this position. Josh Allen hurt his shoulder, left the game a little bit early in there, missed a couple snaps. Doesn't sound serious. He should be fine. Trevor Lawrence, the knee injury doesn't sound too serious, but he is on a short week this week. He does play on Thursday Night Football, so it's possible he maybe misses a game or he's limited in the Thursday night game. The significant injuries at quarterback were Ryan Tannehill, Justin Fields, and Jimmy Garoppolo. So Ryan Tannehill, potentially a big ankle issue that he suffered in London, maybe a high ankle sprain, maybe something like that. Maybe we're going to get Will Levis. Maybe we're going to get Malik Willis for the next couple weeks. Regardless, not good news for anybody involved if you're starting Derrick Henry, if you're starting any, DeAndre Hopkins or whatever. Justin Fields dislocated his thumb. Good chance he needs surgery, according to Jesse Morris, about a month to repair. I'll let you give your thoughts on a second in the quarterbacks. Jimmy Garoppolo, laceration of his kidney potentially, or a back issue. We don't exactly know. 3 to 4 weeks potential IR, according to Dr. Jesse Morris. So Fields, Tannehill, and Garoppolo are the 3 that we probably need to be worried about.
Yeah, and Fields in particular, there was an image that actually went around, a graphic that went around of his thumb, the way it looks right now. And it was completely out of the socket. It was just popped out. You saw the swelling and everything. That's concerning, man, especially for a guy that was already fighting for his long-term future on the Bears. And I mean, in the NFL in general, to be quite honest, I think he's going to obviously play next year regardless. But I mean, for a young quarterback who finally shown signs of life these past couple weeks, to have that happen, man, the Bears are going to get the 1 and 2 picks at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And Justin Fields is going to be on a different team because there's no way they're going to pass up the opportunity to reset the clock, grab themselves a better prospect in Caleb Williams and a guy that they seemed lukewarm on anyway with Justin Fields and offload him to a different team. So yeah, not great news for Justin Fields' dynasty value, I would say as well, because him playing well was something that was going to buoy his dynasty value. And if he misses a couple games here, about a month to repair is what Dr. Jesse Moore says this injury requires. And that could mean he gets put on IR, and we're going to get Tyson Bagent starting games, and the Chicago Bears pass catchers like DJ Moore and those type of players, they're going to be real-time stock down, because Justin Fields, while he wasn't the greatest passer in the world, he's a significant upgrade over Tyson Bagent.
Yeah, I mean, what was he, a day 3 pick, undrafted quarterback? He had some success at a small college, but realistically, welcome to the NFL, buddy. Because if Justin Fields was struggling in this offense, I don't want to see what Tyson Bagent looks like in this offense. And like you kind of mentioned, DJ Moore was a guy I ranked as my wide receiver 13 coming into the week based off the matchup, based off how he's played all year. He was the wide receiver 6 on the season. And we actually mentioned him on our Sell High. Obviously, this is not the scenario we envisioned for it happening, but the Bears offense going forward, man, they were already bad, but this can just take it to an even all-time low.
Yeah, and I actually made a trade in our Devy League. I traded away Saquon Barkley and DJ Moore this past week for Amon-Ra St. Brown, looking like it's aging pretty well so far. I mainly the goal of that trade was for me to get Saquon off of my roster because I think I can't compete this year. I have a ton of young wide receivers in the wheelhouse with Malik Neighbors and Emeka Egbuka and stuff. So I was like, hey, I got a bunch of young receivers. I now have Chris Olave. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown to build around, plus those young guys, and even some good depth like Godwin and Christian Kirk and Elijah Moore and those type of guys. So I'm trying to just kind of reset my team into a 1-year punt. And I think that trade worked out for me there. But running back wise, we did have a lot of running back injuries as well. The biggest being the best running back in fantasy, Christian McCaffrey, suffering an oblique strain is what it's being called. Possible rib injury, according to Jesse Morris, because the two are kind of connected. He said could play through it, but it's going to be a 3 to 4 week hindrance to his health was the words that he used. So that means maybe they're going to limit his workload a bit. Maybe he's going to miss a game or two. Maybe he's going to be at risk for a re-injury. We don't exactly know how severe this is. Apparently it is a pain tolerance thing, and he probably could play through it, but it could cause him to lose some work, or it could cause him to miss a game or two or re-injure it.
Well, keep this in mind. The San Francisco 49ers have their bye week in week 9. Christian McCaffrey plays the running back position. Like, you get a couple hits to your oblique. You're already playing through pain as it is, man. Like, I wouldn't be shocked within these next couple weeks playing against Minnesota, playing against Cincinnati. Like, at least for the Minnesota game, why would you rush him out there if he's dealing with this type of pain?
Yeah, I think they would be smart to hold him out a game, maybe play him in a limited capacity against Cincinnati, use him as needed, and then let him get healthy into the week 9 bye. That's something that, again, we have to think about this from the team perspective. They don't care about our fantasy teams. They literally do not give a shit. So CMC being healthy for the stretch run is what the San Francisco 49ers care about, and him missing a game, maybe being limited in the next game, and then having his bye week is a real possibility. So if you guys have Christian McCaffrey and maybe you're 2-4 after this week, I don't know how you would be given how good Christian McCaffrey is, but it's possible that you're going to be struggling a little bit to score some fantasy points with CMC with some kind of hindrance to his health. The other big injury that we saw was David Montgomery, who suffered a left shoulder cartilage bruise is what it's being called here. Apparently he's going to be doubtful for week 7. Again, he can play through it, but it's a pain tolerance situation. Bye week in week 9 as well. So he has the same bye week that Christian McCaffrey has. So maybe I think the Lions could hold him out for the next 2 games here. We also have to remember that Jahmyr Gibbs has missed the last 2 games with a hamstring injury. So I think it could depend on Jahmyr Gibbs' health, right? Like, this could be kind of connected, where if David Montgomery is close to going, but Jahmyr Gibbs isn't ready yet, then maybe David Montgomery plays through it, or vice versa. If David Montgomery can't play through it and Jahmyr Gibbs is close to getting back, maybe they're like, hey, David, take a couple weeks off. We'll get you back after the bye or whatever. But either way, we're going to talk about Craig Reynolds, I'm sure, in the waiver section of this video. David Montgomery, I would say, is probably going to be on the mend, at least for 1 game, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you with that.
Yeah, and then we also had Kyren Williams and Ramondre Stevenson. Both of them left early with ankle injuries. Ramondre did return, so his is probably not that concerning. But Kyren Williams, it came out from Ian Rappaport today that his could be concerning. He's getting an MRI on it. He didn't have like a walking boot or anything. But if he's out multiple games, Ronnie Rivers also suffered a PCL injury in this game. And we saw Dynasty darling, Debbie darling, Zach Evans make his debut, only played 5 snaps. But if he's alone in this backfield, or if Kyron's banged up and, Ronnie Rivers is on the mend, maybe we could start to see Zach Evans work his way into this backfield a little bit more. He might be worth a speculative add on the waiver wire if you guys are in deeper leagues, especially as well, because, maybe a week from now, he's a big time waiver add, right? And we want to get ahead of that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and then closing out the injury stuff, we do have a couple wide receiver injuries. Deebo Samuel suffered a potential AC joint sprain, and he might miss a couple games again. Week 9 bye. It would make a lot of sense if they held him out for a couple games as well.
How many people are going down with AC joint sprains in the last month?
I don't know, but the answer is a lot. The X-rays were negative, but they usually are. You usually don't like break your collarbone on these type of injuries. It's usually like a multi-week thing.
Very pain tolerance based. Very pain tolerance based. Like this injury, we've seen T. Higgins struggle with it. We've seen not T. Higgins. There was another receiver that struggled with it. We saw Derek Carr struggle with it for the last couple of weeks prior to
Devontae Adams playing through
Devontae Adams. That's who it was, not T. Higgins. Devontae Adams been struggling through it. Like, this is a real issue. And I mean, I saw it even in 2019 when it happened to Dak. Like, this injury, man, it limits your full range of motion in that shoulder.
Yeah, for sure. We also saw Garrett Wilson leave a couple different times with an ankle issue. Yeah. Did return and still played, but not a whole lot of information. Again, the MetLife turf is rearing its ugly head again.
Man.
Cooper Kupp, right ankle was rolled up on, and that's significant. It didn't really get any pub, but the reason that Dr. Morris talked about it is because this is the same ankle that he had tightrope surgery on this past offseason. So if he's going to be dealing with any kind of like ankle rolling or whatever, it might mess with the surgery he had. Something to keep in mind, because Cooper Kupp, obviously, since he's been back, has been really good. But part of why we were lower on him was this like injury concern that he's had, as well as, you know, his age and that kind of thing. And then DeAndre Hopkins had a hand injury, not a whole lot of information on that. If he's on the mend, I mean, the Titans are going to be a complete dumpster fire without Ryan Tannehill and DeAndre Hopkins. But DK Metcalf, also a hip injury, did return to the game. He should be just fine. And then Hunter Henry had an ankle injury, did return to the game as well. So that is the week 6 injury apocalypse. There's a ton of information. I'm sure when we get into the wide receiver tier list and the running back tier list throughout this week, later on in the week, we're going to give a lot of updates on this stuff. But yeah, I mean, the injury update section of those tier list videos, at least for the running back position, was very easy going for the first couple weeks. And now it's really starting to be like, okay, this guy's on IR now. This guy's going to be stepping in. This guy's going to be out. Maybe this guy's going to be questionable. Like it's getting a little bit crazy now at the running back position, especially.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, even at the wide receiver position, that's something too people miss. Like I'll go through all the will they play at the start of the video and then be like, where's this guy? Where's this guy? And I'm like, that just kind of reminds me of how many guys are actually dealing with injury, because the tier list looks completely different after you remove those games from the list. Or
yeah, it's hard to keep track of, to be honest, with all these players. So that was the biggest takeaway of the week. We had to, you know, 100%. Give a lot of injury updates. We can get into takeaway number 2. And of course, the structure of the show, if you guys aren't familiar with it, we're going to get into our fantasy football reactions for the first like 40 minutes or so. Then we'll talk about some of your dynasty trades. Then we'll get into some of the waiver wire ads for the week. So takeaway number 2, I mean, we already kind of touched on the Bears Vikings a little bit. Big time fantasy flop. I thought this was going to be a nice shootout. We see, you know, stock up across the board for a lot of these players. Jordan Addison, first game without Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson, first game without Justin Jefferson. DJ Moore against the soft secondary for the Minnesota Vikings. Justin Fields, maybe his 3rd game in a row with a really good fantasy performance. Instead, it was death for everybody, including Justin Fields, who, like we said, could be out for a month, give or take, based on the medical insight that we have here. Jordan Addison scores. He has 5 targets, 3 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown on just, you know, 5 targets. Nothing great, but he does get it done, I guess, to some degree. DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, if Justin Fields is going to be out, man, these guys are going to be probably not even startable, I would say. Definitely Cole Kmet, definitely not startable, but DJ Moore
is wide receiver like 3-ish.
It's not going to be great. And then the only positive that came out of this game from a fantasy perspective, if you have Alexander Mattison, is that he saw 25 opportunities and 7 of those were targets. And he got back up to the like 75% snap share that we've seen. Maybe use that usage to sell him. As we talked about in last week's video, his usage was on the downtick. I still am worried about Alexander Mattison, especially if this offense is not going to look that good against a really bad defense. So for me, you like in sharper leagues where people follow usage, they might be like, oh, stock up on Madison. The usage has corrected itself. I would use that to sell him personally.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you when it comes to Alexander Mattison, because even when he's getting that elite usage in a prime matchup against the Bears, he's a low end RB2 this week. Like that just kind of goes to show you what the Alexander Mattison experience is going to be. Yeah, he's already a threat, like you said, like we mentioned on the trade targets video, the sell high video last week, to lose work going forward from Cam Akers. But even when he has this workload, he's just not a good enough player to take it and run. So realistically, what's the fantasy upside when it comes to Alexander Mattison, RB2, even if he held this? Whereas people might think, oh, Minnesota offense, you know, he's going to get a lot more work. This is exactly the blueprint they're going to do with Justin Jefferson out of the lineup. And you could use that, like you said, to capitalize on. But we can move on to the next takeaway. And my takeaway is that it was upset city around the NFL this week. The remaining undefeated teams in the NFL, the 49ers and the Eagles, both went down in the same week, both in dramatic fashion. Obviously, the 49ers missing that game-winning field goal from Jake Moody, and obviously the Philadelphia Eagles. What a shocker, man. The Jets just play with so much heart. Robert Saleh gets those boys fired up, and man, that Jets defense caused Jalen Hurts significant concerns. You're without your top 2 corners, and you're holding that high-powered Eagles offense to 14 points, holding Jalen Hurts to 3 interceptions, 5 overall turnovers on that team. Like, kudos to those Jets, man, because they play with a lot of heart. Commanders also surprised the Falcons on the road this week. Desmond Ridder we'll get into in a second, but the passing volume was there. The only problem is Desmond Ridder is just not a very good quarterback and threw 3 picks on it as a result. A lot of close wins from teams expected to take care of business. Bills narrowly edged out the Giants. Dolphins at first, obviously they finished 42-21, but they went down 14-0 to the Panthers at one point. Ravens slugfest against the Titans. Like, this week really reminded me, like I said at the precursor of the video or of the live stream, that it's tough to gauge the NFL when just random stuff like this is happening on a week-to-week basis at this point.
Yeah, this was the any given Sunday NFL week. There's always one every single year where we're like, all the good teams lost or looked bad, and all of the bad teams looked capable. And there's a good chance that like 90% of what we saw this week is not what happens going
Fugazi.
forward. The one thing that I do think I'm excited about, I mean, it's kind of biased just because I'm like still like somehow a Zach Wilson truther.
Yeah.
The Giants, the Chargers, and the Raiders the next 3 weeks. The Jets are 3-3. Maybe they can make some noise. I don't know, man. I thought that game was really interesting to watch. Of course, another big takeaway from that game was Breece Hall getting back on track from a workload standpoint. He had, a better fantasy day last week from like a raw fantasy production standpoint, but we did see him get a higher, percentage of the snaps and percentage of the work. Dalvin Cook obviously showed why he isn't very effective yet again. So I think he had his like longest run of the season though, which was like 8 yards, which I thought was hilarious.
Hear me out real quick. For what it's worth, because we were mentioning Zach Wilson real quick. For what it's worth, he's only had 1 interception in the last 4 games.
I mean, him taking care of the football is probably all that needs to happen for them to win games if their defense plays like that against that offense in Philadelphia. But yeah, 43 of 65 snaps for Breece Hall, 24 of the 40 routes for Breece Hall. He had 12 carries and 5 targets. Again, not the best, workload, but in terms of percentage of the work, I mean, other running backs combined for 4 carries, Michael Carter and Dalvin Cook, and other running backs combined for 2 targets. So we got the majority of all of the running back workload there. And it looks like this like ramp up is complete. He's going to be, an RB1 rest of the season. Let me ask you this, because we're going to update our rest of season rankings today. And every Monday afternoon, we'll make sure that those are updated for those of you guys that have access to them. And you can get access to them on our site, which is linked down below in the description. How many running backs would you rather have than Breece Hall rest of the season?
Well, let me just look through it right now. Rest of season rankings. So if we're talking about Breece Hall, would you rather have Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker rest of season?
I think I would rather have Kenneth Walker, given the workload spike that we saw from him and how well he's playing too. And the Seahawks offense seems to really want to run through him. But that is probably the line, and it's pretty close.
Breece Hall or Saquon Barkley?
I would rather have Breece Hall.
By far for me. Like, not close.
Yeah, I mean, they're similar projection. They're both really good running backs and bad offenses, but Breece Hall looks more explosive and looks better and has more, kind of target upside by the looks of it, too.
Breece Hall or DeAndre Swift?
I would rather have Breece Hall. Even though I think DeAndre Swift is a better projection because he's in a better offense, I think Breece Hall's workload is much better.
Breece Hall or Jonathan Taylor? I think I'm going JT there.
I think I go JT as well. That's close, though. I mean, Jonathan Taylor is my RB5 rest of the season. Travis Etienne has since surpassed him. He was my RB4 last week. But other than that, I mean, like Pollard and Barkley and Walker and those type of guys, like that's the range we're talking about with Breece Hall at this point.
You have Etienne at 5. Who's your top 4 then?
I have Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, and Austin Eckler as my top 3, and Etienne is my 4. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Taylor is my 5. Sorry, Taylor is my 5. If I said
correct.
Etienne.
Okay. All right. And then, so you would have Breece Hall with like Raheem Mostert, Tony Pollard in them?
Yeah, Breece Hall is my RB8 right now, behind Kenneth Walker at RB7, Tony Pollard at RB6, and then Taylor, Etienne, Eckler, and Bijan is my.
Oh, so you have Mostert lower than that?
Yeah, Mostert is at 10 for me right now.
Okay. I wasn't sure. Okay, yeah, that's
mainly just due to the fact, like, if you wanted to say like over the next like 5 weeks, like Mostert would probably be a top 4 running back, but over the rest of the season, A-Chain's going to come back in week 11.
Very fair. Yeah, no, I was just gauging you there. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But moving on to the next takeaway, and I just want to build off of it because obviously it applies to one of the undefeated teams going down. Man, this Browns defense is a fucking fantasy nightmare. And looking at what's happening to the season thus far, the Browns defense was the number 1 defense in the week in the NFL coming into the week. But everybody thought coming into the game, the 49ers, they put up 42 on the Cowboys. PJ Walker starting. Deshaun Watson's out for this game. Like, we're expecting the 49ers to take care of business in this outing. Brock Purdy has his worst game as a pro. CMC was inefficient even prior to his injury. Brandon Ayuk was the only offensive player on the San Francisco 49ers to crack 55 yards from scrimmage. And obviously, the weather was a factor in this game for sure. But the way Jim Schwartz has this defense playing right now has really just been eye-opening to me. They are the number 1 defense in terms of both pass and run DVOA. We've mentioned multiple times on the matchup chart, they are by far the number 1 team in terms of worst fantasy matchups for opposing wide receivers. I'm assuming they're probably going to rank extremely highly in terms of against running backs as well. Like, this defense looks like an all-time level defense right now.
Yeah, in terms of EPA per play, they're the best in the league right now. The Ravens
by far.
actually are second, who are
Yeah.
also in the same division as them. So, really good, performance from that defense. We're starting to get, now that it's week 6, or after week 6, we're starting to get a real understanding of like
Yeah.
what defenses are exploitable, what defenses are not exploitable, who we want to kind of avoid, and that kind of thing. And the Browns very clearly look like a team that even the 49ers struggled with.
Dude, and I'm just gonna say this right now. I mentioned it as like something to monitor coming to the week. Obviously, I ended up pivoting because I mean the 49ers I just thought were way too talented to lose in this spot. But I mentioned coming into the week, I'm like, historically, Jim Schwartz has kind of had Kyle Shanahan's number, man. And I mean, it spoke volumes on Sunday, just how good that Browns defense looked. Myles Garrett, I think you can make the argument that he's the best defensive player on the planet. He had Trent Williams in the gulag all game. Even I get that he left during injury for injury during the game, but like Myles Garrett looks unblockable right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of always looked like that. Only now the defense is kind of surrounding him looks a lot better because the secondary, specifically, I think the secondary has been the difference in their defense this year versus previous years.
And I'm going to point this out right now. It's the Browns defense, Rico. It's not close. Like this Browns defense looks legendary.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we'll answer a lot of questions later on when we go live before the
yeah.
Monday night game, if you guys have any more questions. But I'll skip to one of my takeaways here, and then we can hop back to the one that you have here about quarterbacks.
Yeah.
There's a couple backfields that had a lot of changes. I already talked about Alexander Mattison in the Vikings backfield, going back up to Mattison getting a 75% snap share in this game. Not sure if that's going to be consistent week over week. The Vikings were leading, which is potentially why Mattison got a lot more of the carries. So keep an eye on that. And again, probably sell high on Alexander Mattison. Texans backfield was probably the biggest surprise. I would say Devin Singletary snapping. Dameon Pierce, 32-21. He had 14 opportunities to Pierce's 13. So that is not a good situation. If you guys had Dameon Pierce, he was trending in the right direction the previous 2 weeks. He had, I think it was 59 and 59% of the snaps, respectively, the games before this. And then all out of nowhere, all of a sudden, Devin Singletary's out snapping him.
Yeah, it's why do the Texans just mix in a couple weeks every year where like every single usage trend just gets thrown out the window? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, obviously, Devin Singletary, you can argue, has been the better back so far this year.
He has been, dude. He's been much better. Dameon Pierce averaging like 2.9 a carry right now. Like he's been really bad from that perspective. He's been like, when you watch him, he looks better than Devin Singletary on some runs, but Devin Singletary has been more consistent.
Well, it's so funny because like you'll watch Dameon Pierce like break 4 tackles for a gain of 2, and then you'll see Devin Singletary not get touched till like he's 6 yards down the field. I'm like, obviously that's very like narrative-y, like, oh, like just watch the tape type of take there. But like, why is there such a disparity in the run blocking value between when Dameon Pierce gets the ball? Maybe that's just due to his burst. It looks like he's breaking more tackles because he doesn't have the burst that Devin Singletary does. But man, yeah, he's been way less efficient than Singletary has to start the season.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me. I remember in 2019, the Bucs running backs, I would always watch the run blocking for Peyton Barber versus Ronald Jones. And for some reason, Peyton Barber's run blocking was always way better. And it probably has more to do with the running back than we think. Like the guy's reading the wrong holes or whatever. And that's obviously been a problem for Rojo. And maybe it's a problem for Dameon Pierce. So that's something that we definitely need to monitor. I tend to think that Pierce is maybe a buy low if people are really, really spooked by this usage. But at the same time, I mean, Devin Singletary is probably somebody we're going to talk about in the waiver ads portion of this video. Then we saw the Browns backfield. Kareem Hunt inject a big time bite out of the Jerome Ford pie. 37% of the snaps for Kareem Hunt, only 50% for Jerome Ford. He had previously been living kind of in the 60% range and up near 70% on some of those games. So the Browns backfield looks like one that you don't really want to start anybody from. I would still say it's Jerome Ford going forward, but Kareem Hunt actually probably looked the best he's looked recently too as well. So that could be a problem for Ford going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to mention him on tomorrow's video as well. He'll be one of the top 10 waivers, but Kareem Hunt is, like you said, very, very much involved in this backfield. And I do think once Deshaun Watson gets back, this offense looks, at least a semblance of what we expected coming into the season, that this could be potentially even a 50-50 timeshare moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The Colts backfield, this was something I was definitely monitoring, as were you, because we have Jonathan Taylor on our FFPC team. Zach Moss and JT pretty much split the backfield down the middle. Again, I expected Taylor's workload to be a little more than that this week. I thought he would be maybe a 60%, 65% guy, like maybe 80, 90% of his full workload. I do expect this backfield to be Jonathan Taylor's going forward. Like, I'm not really worried about Zach Moss keeping this a 50-50 split. I think it's a ramp up, right? Over the next week or two, he's going to get back to his full workload. That's typically what happens when you're coming off a multi-week injury as a running back. 1, 2, 3 games is what it takes for you to get back up to your full workload. And that's what Jonathan Taylor is doing right now. And the Colts offense also looked pretty bad this past week, which has me a little concerned about Jonathan Taylor's outlook, because I think you could really make the argument that, okay, well, why are we holding against Saquon Barkley the fact that the Giants offense is not very good when the Colts without Anthony Richardson have been, like, at least in this one game sample size, were really bad.
Yeah, no, 100%. Not to mention, I mean, the difference in workload between the two with what we could expect as of right now. Because obviously, there's still the concern. Like we said, we expect Jonathan Taylor to be that guy moving forward. But I think Zach Moss is far better than any competition they have on the Giants, and that includes Matt Breida.
Yeah, that's probably the difference for sure. But I'm relatively
100%.
concerned about the Colts offense. The Jags are really good at stopping the run. They're more of the type of team you want to pass against, and the Colts just they don't really have the ability to do that with a backup quarterback. And their Gardner Minshew made some like straight head scratching decisions as well in that game and threw some lame duck footballs. But yeah, we'll have to keep that in mind with the Colts going forward. It's not going to be business as usual by the looks of it.
And real quick, these next 2 weeks isn't going to do him any favors going against Cleveland and going against the Saints.
Yeah, like those are two of the top 6 defenses in EPA per play allowed right now, and one of them is number 1, like we said, for Cleveland. So not great. Yeah, that is not great for the Colts going forward. Then we had the Patriots backfield, of course, because I traded Ramondre Stevenson away last week. Of course, he was going to course correct, have 65% of the snaps and 62% of the routes. Am I excited about Ramondre Stevenson still? No, but this was better. Definitely. Yeah. It was a good matchup. You needed to do this. If you didn't do this in this matchup, he would have been lost at sea for the rest of the season, probably.
Well, his game also got salvaged because the Raiders had like a very, very dumb penalty. He ends up getting I think it was on 4th down. They got a dumb penalty. Patriots get a first down off of it, 1st and goal on the 1, and then Ramondre scores a touchdown off of it when I think the Patriots are going to kick a field goal at that point.
Yeah, I think the thing I worry about for Ramondre going forward is like how often they're going to be winning games, first of all, and like how often they're going to be playing against backup quarterbacks like Brian Hoyer. Like, I think I'm not saying they're going to get blown out like they did against the Cowboys and the Saints the 2 games prior to this one every week, but I don't think they're going to be in a position to be in a lot of close games where they're potentially winning. And that makes me think that the whole Zeke Elliott's good in pass protection narrative is why he was playing more in the past couple games.
How many games do you think the Patriots end up winning this year? I would set the over-under
like 5 or 6.
I was going to set the over-under like 4.5.
I think probably 5 or 6. I think Belichick's good enough coach to get them to 5 or 6 wins, but their roster is probably the worst in the NFL.
It probably is, man. Like I
think their roster is worse than Chicago's and Minnesota's and Denver's, like all the other bad.
At least offensively.
Yeah, I think defensively their roster's good and they're a well-coached defense. But like individual talents of the players, I don't think they're also especially without Christian Gonzalez, for probably the rest of the season, if not a while.
Well, their next 2 games do them no favors going up against Buffalo and Miami.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they'll play those teams tough divisional games, and they typically do, but that's, not looking good for them so far. Cardinals backfield's the last one that I want to talk about here. Amari DiMercato just absolutely letting down everybody. I tweeted out during the games that somebody find DiMercato. He stole $31 fab dollars from me because, I mean, not that his usage was horrible. I mean, he played 33 snaps, but Keontae Ingram played 28, and for some reason, Damian Williams is relevant, and he played 13. It was like a 3-way timeshare, and it looks like James Conner was the reason that he was valuable, not his workload. Like James Conner is just a significantly better running back. And had DiMercato gotten more work, maybe he's more valuable than this, but it looks like they're not going to be like, hey, we're just going to give whoever is behind James Conner a huge workload in this game. And maybe I would say Ingram is the guy that I would actually prefer going forward, because Ingram was coming off of a multi-week injury and he still almost tied him in snaps.
I'll talk about that a little bit on tomorrow's waivers, because I think barring anything happening tonight in the Cowboys game, like knock on wood, that we don't have to talk about Josh Kelly or Rico Dowdle or someone like that. Barring any of that happening, like he's more than likely going to be one of the top 10 waivers coming into the week. Keontae Ingram, like you said, coming off that multi-week absence, commanding the work that he did. And I mean, I would argue that flat out, he's probably the better running back at this point than DiMercato is.
Yeah, Keontae Ingram was a guy that I thought was like a half decent prospect. So he can be a guy that can work in on early downs. And like, how valuable is the early down ball carrier if they're splitting pass catching work on the Arizona Cardinals? Probably not that valuable, because James Conner was not splitting pass catching work. He was getting the majority of the long down and distance and a lot of the routes and that kind of thing. And DiMercato was working in a little bit, but James Conner was much more involved in the red zone and had a little bit of pass catching usage. And it looks like it's going to be DiMercato on long down and distance or when they're losing, which is going to be a lot, and Keontae Ingram when the game is close or they're winning, which is going to be so unpredictable, because the Cardinals are this like Jekyll and Hyde team that plays some teams tough and look non-competitive against others.
Yeah, no, exactly. My next takeaway actually is going to be that the quarterbacks, like, were they sleeping during the slate? Did they not set
Yes.
their alarms? Like, what was going on here? This is a tweet from Hayden Winks. I'm actually going to get into the brand. I'll just read off the thing. Can you put that into the streamer for me? By the way,
Yeah, I mean, we could just read it off.
I
It's
would just read off.
There's been 2 quarterbacks to reach 20 fantasy points this week. Nobody reached more than 23.
The 2 leading quarterbacks in this slate this week scored 22 fantasy points. Like, that's just remarkably bad considering how many good fantasy options at the quarterback position we saw. Burrow and Josh Allen both going for sub 14 fantasy
Both in
points.
great matchups too, to actually have good games.
Jalen Hurts, 3 interceptions in that game. It was just sloppy week from the quarterback position. I mean, to be fair, that also probably ties into why it was probably the most variance week of the entire season. It's probably just because the superstar quarterbacks didn't play like they usually do.
Yeah, like, I mean, I can't think of a quarterback that anybody was excited with their performance. So, I mean, maybe that's a good thing because then, like, scoring in general was probably just down in a lot of your guys' fantasy leagues. But yeah, that is a pretty rough week from a lot of the top fantasy quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And I don't feel so bad knowing that Josh Allen had like a dud when every other fantasy quarterback pretty much had the same kind of situation happen.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I'll just tie it into the next takeaway, and then you can finalize with the takeaway number 8. But my 7th takeaway here is that the Falcons' passing offense is somewhat becoming viable, and I get it. This is solely from a fantasy perspective. Like, Desmond Ridder is still hot garbage. He threw 3 picks. The game-ending interception with like 4 minutes left, he threw it on the goal line, 3rd and goal. That was an absolute freaking muffin to the Commanders' defensive back. Like, he did not play well. But what my takeaway is that he had 47 pass attempts in this game, and we saw the huge breakout games from Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Drake London, 9 receptions, 125 yards on 12 targets, looked like that clear alpha wide receiver, that we had coming into the season. It's just our main question was, would the passing volume be able to support it? And if they can show this type of passing ability, I understand Washington is by far a pass funnel defense, given how their secondary has looked this year. But at the end of the day, we never saw Arthur Smith go based off the game script. Last year, we just saw, okay, they're going to run the ball 40 times a game, and they're going to maybe pass 20 to 25 times. At least we're seeing this year, depending on the matchup, Arthur Smith is willing to put the ball in Desmond Ridder's hands and get the ball to his playmakers. You have 2 top 8 overall picks on the outside there with Kyle Pitts and with Drake London. I understand Desmond Ridder's not that guy, but when you're facing a weak secondary, you need your quarterback to be able to throw the ball 40, 45, 47 times like he did in this game. And again, like I said, I don't think Desmond Ridder is going to be efficient on that type of volume, but at the same time, for the sakes of Drake London and Kyle Pitts, that is a major upgrade for them moving forward rest of the season.
Well, yeah. How many times did you hear me or Danny say, like, hey, if we just get like 525 pass attempts from this offense, like Drake London and Kyle Pitts could be legitimate studs? And has Kyle Pitts been a stud? No, not really, but he's been pretty good the last 2 games.
Yeah.
He's been a viable tight end for you, and Drake London having 12 targets this past week is definitely good news for him as well. So, yeah, I would say stock up overall on the offense. Again, Desmond Ritter's still early on in his career. He could still get better. It looks like he has a much longer leash than I'd be willing to give him. I would have benched him after the Jacksonville game or midway through the Jacksonville game if it was me. And Taylor Heineke would be the quarterback. And I'm still kind of rooting for that on some level because I think Heineke would really, push the ball downfield to Pitts and to London and that kind of thing. But at the same time, the pass attempts was what we wanted. We didn't really care who was throwing them for the Falcons. We just needed the pass attempts.
I have a funny stat for you. So he scored this week, Kyle Pitts. How many career touchdowns do you think Kyle Pitts has?
Is it
6'6", 246 pound tight end. That was his 4th career touchdown. His first since week 8 of last year.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, man. Like, I don't know how you can and the annoying thing, I think the most annoying thing about that is that you see Jonnu Smith score a touchdown in this game, and you see designed flail out flat routes from Mecole Pruitt every other week too. Like, it's not like they don't know how to design an offense around a tight end. Like, Arthur Smith was a tight ends coach before he became the OC of the Tennessee Titans before he got the job in Atlanta. He knows how to use Kyle Pitts, and he does use him properly. The only issue is that it's so hyper annoying that he's actually kind of in a slight tight end committee.
Yeah, no, it is pretty annoying. However, I will say 30 targets across the last 4 weeks for Kyle Pitts, including 17 across the last 2. like we kind of mentioned, even if he's rotating to a certain degree with Jonnu Smith, the fact that this is such a consolidated target share between Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and I guess even if you want to throw, Jonnu and of course Bijan Robinson in there, like Mac Hollins is whatever. They don't have Olamide Zacchaeus anymore. Like
Van
realistically,
Jefferson they traded
Van
for.
Jefferson, okay, cool. Like he's the classic wind sprint wide receiver that maybe affects the third level of the field. Like realistically on this team, where the targets are going. And if the volume's going up, that just means it's a stock up across the board.
Yeah, and air yard share, Kyle Pitts ranked first among all tight ends coming into this game. 5 deep targets, also first among tight ends coming into this game. 3 red zone targets. He did have a couple plays, where he was targeted in the red zone and penalties drew him back as well. So those don't even count. Of course, he does, rank number 1 in unrealized air yards because Desmond Ridder can't actually hit the broadside of a barn. But at the same time, the usage is there. And I would say, like, unless you have Sam Laporta or Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce, like, what else are you going to get at tight end? Like, there's upside guys, there's Luke Musgraves of the world, but like, I mean, we saw Zach Ertz get completely wiped by Trey McBride this week in terms of a snap share. So even like our depth streamer option, like Hunter Henry's been useless since week 2. Like
Logan Thomas had one target.
Tight end streets right now. Kyle Pitts is a top 6 tight end, unfortunately.
And then if you have George Kittle, you're experiencing the most volatile season.
Yeah, you're going to get 36 points a week, or you're going to get 2.
1. Yeah.
Yeah, he had 1 point this week. That is the George Kittle experience. Unfortunately, if you didn't know this, you haven't been playing fantasy long. This has been the experience for years with George Kittle, and maybe Debo being out a couple games, if that's possible, will help him out a little bit. But it was a tough matchup, bad weather, that kind of stuff, and that's just you're a tight end. Tight ends don't do what Travis Kelce does. Don't compare tight ends to what Travis Kelce does. He is a unicorn for a reason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But we can go on to the final takeaway, and I'll let you take it away with wide receiver league winners, just absolute galore in 2023, coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, dude, I have no idea what's going on at wide receiver, because typically I think we were preaching throughout the offseason that, once you get to around like 8 to 15, generally speaking, running backs are a better bet than wide receivers, unless you're going after like rookie wide receivers, or in best ball, sometimes slot receivers are undervalued because, they're not the superstar guys. And, we saw last year with Jacoby Myers and like, years past with Hunter Renfrow that has kind of materialized. But this year, man, like we're seeing Adam Thielen post one of the best seasons of his career in Carolina. 21.1 PPR points per game. He is the wide receiver 6 right now. Puka Nacua, also a late round rookie wide receiver, 20.4 PPR points per game, wide receiver 8 right now. And he dropped the touchdown, could have had a bigger game. Jacoby Myers, 17.5 PPR points per game, who's routinely undervalued, I guess. Jacoby Myers is just the answer anytime he's available in the late rounds. He is outscoring Devontae Adams, not even capping on a points per game basis.
Yeah.
Wide receiver 12 on the season. And then Nico Collins, another late round wide receiver that we were kind of excited about, averaging 17 PPR points per game, wide receiver 14 right now. He's been a little bit more volatile, but he has proven those big weeks, and that's been good to see. So, I mean, for me, I just can't remember this many like round 1 or round 2 rookie wide receiver break. Like usually if we get a breakout receiver that's like late in the draft, that's what it is, right? It's Garrett Wilson, it's Chris Olave, it's Justin Jefferson, it's Brandon Ayuk. It's like these guys that went high in the draft, and that's why they were sleepers, because they were rookies, and not like washed up Adam Thielen, decent contract, but solid veteran like Jacoby Myers, day 3 rookie in Puka Nacua, and 4th year breakout Nico Collins. Like it's a weird, unpredictable wide receiver breakout season.
I have a stat for you. Since week 2, how many targets do you think Adam Thielen has? Don't look it up.
Since week 2? So he's played, 4 games in that span? 5 games? I bet he has 47 targets. Higher. 54 targets.
57 targets from Adam Thielen, over 11 targets per game.
What is going on?
What is going on? And I joked about it on Twitter because I ended up with 5% Adam Thielen in Best Ball Mania. And
8%. I don't know how. I don't feel like I ever drafted the guy.
I joked with Sam Sherman. I said, going into the year, I thought I had 5% too much Adam Thielen. And now I'm realizing I had 95% too little.
Yeah. Speaking of the Carolina Panthers, it actually just got announced that Frank Reich, will no longer be calling plays, and Panthers offensive coordinator Thomas Brown will be calling plays. We don't know anything about Thomas Brown, but I will say Frank Reich has not been a very good play caller, so I don't think that's a bad thing. And Bryce Young has looked significantly better the last 2 games, so that's good news, I would say.
You gotta love when it comes to that, hiring an old offensive-minded head coach and then not letting him run the play. So, I mean, that hits home for me personally because I'm just seeing that materialize with Mike McCarthy right now. But just hire the young OCs that have experience around like Shanahan and McDaniel and shit. Don't try to overthink it.
Not to mention, there's the benefit that if like Ben Johnson becomes the next Sean McVay, he's young enough to be coaching for another 25 years. If you know what I mean? Like that's also the side benefit of hiring a really young coach is that he's not, a grizzled veteran that's going to get sick of the NFL 4 years from now and want like a year off or 2 years off or whatever. So, yeah, that was week 6. I mean, week 6 was a crazy mess of a bunch of shit, but there's a lot of takeaways we didn't get to, but I think those were some of the biggest ones that I came away with.
100%.
We can walk right into the Dynasty trades. Again, we want to make sure that we're talking about Dynasty every single week because the Dynasty trade market is very active during the season. And I think some of the biggest edges you guys can get in your Dynasty leagues is making trades during the season. And me and Danny, probably at some point this week, maybe Friday, maybe Saturday, maybe
Something
Thursday.
like
I'm not exactly sure what day we're going to do it. We're going to recap all of the trades that we have personally made in our Dynasty leagues to show you guys kind of what we're trying to do strategically in our Dynasty leagues, depending on if we're rebuilding, because I know I've made a couple of those trades and a couple contending trades as well, because a lot of you guys always ask us like, oh, who's a good contending trade target to go after or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. So do we have
let's get into roommates first trade here. So you guys can see it on the screen here. Anytime you're acquiring Patrick Mahomes, you better be giving up an arm, a leg, your firstborn child, and some beachfront real estate. And you did not give nearly enough for this. So congratulations on stealing Patrick Mahomes. Roommates in a 12-team Superflex start 10 league. He said he's a rebuilding team who was strong at wide receiver. I think he had like Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, a bunch of young guys. And now he gets to pair Patrick Mahomes with Justin Herbert. And all he had to give up was, in my opinion, a bust in Treylon Burks. I don't think this guy's going to end up ever becoming a great wide receiver in the NFL. I'm a little concerned. Maybe I'm writing him off too soon. It's still only his second season, but I'm not excited about the injury history. I'm not excited about what I've seen when he is on the field. Jordan Addison, who's a great young wide receiver, but he's not Patrick Mahomes or even remotely close to the caliber of asset that Patrick Mahomes is. Will Levis, who apparently cannot beat out Malik Willis, the guy that we just saw play the end of the game on Sunday morning, who took 4 sacks on 10 dropbacks. A 2024 first round pick. I don't know if it's early. I don't know if it's late.
It has
Even
to be.
if it's early, I don't care. And
even if
round pick, and you somehow got Mahomes plus for that.
So let's adjust our thought. Assuming that this is the 101, it's still the Mahomes side. If it was Caleb Williams plus Addison plus that package.
But if this is a contender trying to trade,
but it's his first. It's roommates first, and he said he was a rebuilding team.
Right. Okay. So even if that's your first, let's say
even if it's the 101.
Even if it's 101 and, more conservatively, probably 101 to 105, like that is a great trade, dude. Like Caleb Williams plus on this is like still not enough for Patrick Mahomes. Agreed. As much as Caleb Williams is a huge needle mover, that's pretty crazy that you got that done. And I think sometimes people can be obsessed with the whole like, oh, let's invest in young players and
start 10,
tanker picks. Like, I do, trust me, like nobody wants to tank their first rounder when they're rebuilding more than me. But if you can get Patrick Mahomes, like you can get Patrick Mahomes. That's just a bottom line, end of discussion.
Yeah, and you already said you're strong at wide receiver. So you being strong at wide receiver, now having Mahomes and Herbert, that already tells me that this isn't going to be the 101. Like this is probably going to be at best case scenario for the guy who just acquired this pick, probably going to be closer to the 103, 104 at best. Because Mahomes, Herbert, and if you have strong wide receivers, is going to get you out of 101 contention to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. So great trade. Again, we are always going to be on the side of buying elite assets when they come at a 100%. Discount. Again, even though you gave up a high value pick, that is a great move to make for sure, especially with all the noise that you gave on top of it. Ethan sends in a trade here. He says Dynasty Superflex, start 11 PPR, half tight end premium. So he made this trade prior to week 5. So this would have been before A-Chain got injured. And he said he thought it was a good time to cash out on A-Chain. Do I believe in that wholeheartedly philosophy of cashing out on a young running back? Not necessarily, but he did want to get some points off of his team, and he wanted to, package his player for a better player, which is what he did. Deshaun Watson, volatile quarterback, but he is still talented. Zach Wilson, whatever, 3rd and 4th rounder, whatever. This trade is essentially Devon A-Chain and Deshaun Watson for Joe Burrow in a second. And I would argue that you're a first too short on the side that you gave up. I think that Deshaun 100%. Watson for Joe Burrow would require
2+1s.
it would require 2+. If you would Deshaun Watson and 2 firsts for Joe Burrow, that would probably be about fair. Deshaun Watson, Devon A-Chain, and a first would probably be about fair. Knowing that you got a second rounder on top of Burrow, sorry, that's the next trade, will definitely lean me towards your side. Again, you're getting the best asset in the deal. You're getting the guy that is the most, bulletproof. Like Joe Burrow, again, could go down with an ACL tear and still be a first-round startup pick tomorrow. Like, that's a great trade.
Yeah. Realistically, when it comes to these type of moves, you didn't give up any first-round liquidity. Yeah, you gave up some points at running back with the youth there with Devon A-Chain, Zach Wilson, whatever. You move off the volatility of Deshaun Watson. And, I mean, he's now dealing with a shoulder injury, and we don't know what's going on there. And we know how fluid this market reacts. If Deshaun Watson's dealing with this injury, and even though we know he has this injury coming into his first game back, if he has a bad first game back, he's suddenly the quarterback 16 in Dynasty.
Yeah, this is a really, Deshaun Watson doesn't have many excuses left. And even though me and you have both been very vocal that we were like, hey, Deshaun Watson of Houston is probably the Deshaun Watson that still exists, the Cleveland Browns don't have time to wait around. Like, if by the end of the season, he looked like an average quarterback, like, that's not good. They needed him to be an elite quarterback to qualify for that contract that he was paid, and all the PR hit and all the draft picks that they gave up. And now you look at what Houston has done with some of those draft picks and with the rebuild, and they have themselves a young franchise quarterback, and that could have been the Cleveland Browns. Like, they could have played Jacoby Brissett all last year and maybe made a trade up for CJ Stroud or a trade up for Anthony Richardson using all the picks that they gave up, not taking the huge PR hit that they took by acquiring Deshaun Watson and not paying him the amount of money that they paid him, and they could have been in the same situation.
It's almost as if the universe is just like speaking karma into existence. Like, Houston moves off this much maligned quarterback with all the, the issues that he has. I don't even have to address them. If you guys play fantasy and have watched football, you guys know exactly what's going on with Deshaun Watson. Take that PR hit for the time being. Then, get in the good graces of the media by trading him away. Browns take that hit on their own right. They're expecting that, Houston Texans level Deshaun Watson to come back. Well, Houston just ends up getting a franchise quarterback on a rookie contract now, still bank the Browns' future first-round pick this year, which, although is probably going to be a playoff team given how good the defense is, like, if Deshaun Watson comes back and doesn't look like that same quarterback, like, it's a tough division, man. You're still competing with the Bengals. You're still competing with the Ravens. The AFC as a whole, like, there's a real possibility where the Browns end up being the 8th or 9th best team in the AFC. And now you're getting a non-playoff first-round pick while already banking in your franchise quarterback, like I said, on a rookie contract.
Yeah. And do they have the Browns first next year too? Or am I making that up?
They had the Browns first this past year.
Right. But wasn't it 3-1s for Watson?
Was it 3?
I think they might have it next year as well.
Let me double check.
I could be wrong about that. But anyways, while you're looking that up, I'll look at the next trade that we have on the docket here. So great moves for Ethan and for roommate, both acquiring elite quarterbacks at a discount. Let's talk about Thad's trade here. He gets,
what's up? They got the 2022 one.
Oh, right. Okay, so yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. Thad says one quarterback, 12-team PPR. He feels like he's a contender with some youth. He has Bijan, Gibbs, Waddle, Ridley, Puka, Ayuk. He said he felt like he needed a better quarterback. It is a one quarterback league, so keep that in mind. It's a one quarterback league, not a super flex league. He needed running back depth, or he needs running back depth as well if he wants to truly compete with this team. I will say, given the strength of your young core, you don't probably need to absolutely force it into the middle. Bijan and Gibbs are both very young running backs who will probably be better next year than they are this year. Anyways, but the trade basically is you get a upgrade at tight end with Michael Mayer for George Kittle. And then you get Jalen Hurts in exchange for Trevor Lawrence, DJ Moore, and like a 3rd-round pick. So one quarterback league, Jalen Hurts is going to be less valuable, but I still think I would spend a top 2 to 3-round startup pick on Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I would probably agree with this, especially from a point production standpoint. In a one quarterback league, having that Konami code factor that Jalen Hurts brings to the table. Like we mention all the time that obviously in a super flex, more quarterbacks don't hold a ton of value, but I still think the top tier quarterbacks, obviously not as much as a super flex, but the top tier quarterbacks in a one quarterback league still give you a significant edge, especially from a production standpoint. Like as much as I love Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts is probably going to outscore him by 3 to 4 fantasy points per game. And like you said, if you're trying to contend this year, that's going to be worthwhile because you get a better contending asset, in my opinion, between George Kittle and Michael Mayer. Although Michael Mayer has looked phenomenal these last couple of weeks, George Kittle is still the more win now productive tight end rest of the season. And while losing DJ Moore hurts, at the same time, now he's going to have Tyson Badger throwing him the football for at least the next month.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you got a little lucky, obviously, that DJ Moore isn't going to be like a league-winning wide receiver like maybe
Yeah.
people thought he was going to be after that huge week that he had last week. But yeah, I think that's an interesting trade to make. If you need some running back depth, my advice would be go cheap. Go after, whoever. Go after Raheem Mostert. Go after somebody like that. Don't go after, Jonathan Taylor or something. If you don't have to, unless you can get him for a huge discount. So if you need some running back depth, I think you could definitely get that done. Let's get into the next trade here, which is from Jay Beadle, which involves a guy that I think should be very hotly contested on the Dynasty open market right now. Two guys, actually.
Yeah.
Bryce Young was the side he receives in a third-round pick in exchange for Puka Nacua, another third-round pick, and then Jalen Ferguson. So it is a 10-team super flex. So 10-team kind of hurts the Bryce Young side a little bit instead of a 12-team, but he does say it's a rebuilding team that owns the 101 and 7 other 2024 firsts and a core Lamar, Roshan, Flowers, Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson. He said the red line is a playoff team. So that third-round pick that he gave away is a much worse third-round pick than the one he received.
Yeah, this is a smash in my opinion, especially in your spot. As much as I love Puka Nacua, he is already going to hurt your value in terms of trying to tank for that 101. So you're already ridding points off your team by getting rid of Puka. Again, I love Puka Nacua. I think he's a top 10 to 13 overall dynasty wide receiver right now. But at the same time, I still prefer Bryce Young in your scenario. You're still getting a nice young quarterback. You'll have Lamar and Bryce Young. And this is ultimately just like a stock buy, if you will, because you're buying Bryce Young low. And I mean, you're going to have an embarrassment of riches if you still get the 101. Then you have Lamar Jackson, Bryce Young, Caleb Williams, where you can have the affordability to move one of them if you chose to at a certain point when all of them are at their peak value. So I think this is an excellent move in your spot.
Yeah, and I would say given the fact that you have 7 other 2024 firsts and what looks like it's going to be a very good wide receiver class when we didn't think it was going to be coming into the season, what if you walk out of this draft with Lamar Jackson as your QB1, Caleb Williams is your QB2, Bryce Young is your QB3, and you can walk out with 3 of or 4 of like Harrison, Neighbors, Igbuka, Rome Odunze,
Coleman,
Troy Franklin. There's so many guys that are emerging this college football season that is going to be really good for you. I will say that like Puka Nacua in his own right, knowing that you have all those picks, because there's also going to be quarterbacks in the first round, right? So you very easily could have just said, I'm going to keep Puka Nacua. He's a building block going forward. Cooper Kupp's getting old. And, I love Puka this year. So Caleb Williams and Lamar are going to be my starting quarterbacks. And maybe I can grab a Michael Penix later on in the first round for my QB3 or whatever. It makes it closer, especially knowing it's a 10-team league. But I will say, I think I like your side getting Bryce Young there.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's the way I kind of look at it is I think it's a fair deal based off market value right now because Puka, is probably a third-round starter pick. Bryce Young's probably a third-round starter pick at the time being. But the factor that why I like your side here is that you're ridding your points. You are making that bet that, okay, I am going to get the 101 this year, and I want to get all the points I can off my team right now. Because even though you say you have the 2024 101 at the same time, like if Puka starts popping off, you know what I mean? Like shit happens, man. Like even if you have like a 70-point max points for advantage right now, I've seen wild crap happen in fantasy leagues. So getting that production off your team, more so securing the spot to potentially get Caleb, who I think as soon as he comes in the NFL is probably going to be a top 6 to 8 startup pick at the very, conservative baseline. Smash move.
Yep, for sure. So final trade, and then we'll get into some of our top waiver ads to start off this week here in week 7. Henry says 10-team PPR, 1 quarterback dynasty. Said his team is not doing well, so he made this trade to get his first back. So getting any first-round pick for a package of Kyren Williams, a second and a third, I think would have been a good trade. Getting your own first-round pick back on a team that you're trying to rebuild is an absolute smash, especially knowing, Kyren Williams is now banged up, which is something I was worried about, knowing that he was a small running back, giving that guy a huge workload. That's typically why it doesn't happen in the NFL. If Kyren Williams was never worth more than he is right now, I would not be shocked in the slightest, and I honestly think that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I've always said it, like, I don't mind holding Kyren on a contending team if you're not getting a first-round equivalent type of price. Like, if you can move Kyren Williams plus a 2 for a 1 or Kyren Williams plus a 2 for a 1. Like, obviously, you're selling for those type of packages. But if someone was just offering you, like, a 2 for Kyren, that's when I was like, okay, I'm contending. I may as well just hold and take the points. In this instance, not only are you not contending, but you're also getting an extremely valuable first pack. Let's just say that's locked into 101, 104. We can just talk about the wide receivers right now. I would take over Kyren a 2 and a 3. Taking Harrison, you're taking Igbuka, you're taking Neighbors, you're taking one of Coleman or Franklin or Odunze or insert wide receiver X here. There's probably 8 or 9 wide receivers in this class I would take over Kyron Williams in that package for basically in Dynasty, period.
Yeah,
Moving forward.
yeah, absolutely. I
So,
mean, it's a one quarterback first and it's a 10-man league, so it loses a little bit of value. But I mean, 101 to 104, like you're probably going to get RB1 in the class, Brock Bowers or Marvin Harrison.
yeah. And I just threw the wide receivers in the discussion.
Yeah, and then if Neighbors or whoever the wide receiver 2 is probably going to be a top 4 or 5 pick. Yeah, exactly. I mean, even in a one quarterback league, he's probably going to have a lot of value as well. So yeah, definitely some great dynasty trades. Good job on you guys for manipulating the market, working some guys that I made sure that we highlighted some players that are probably hotly debated and hotly traded for and traded away on the market right now, because I think those players are the ones that you get the biggest, values when you sell, and values when you buy in that kind of situation. So let's get into our top 5 waiver ads for the week. Of course, Danny will be tackling the top 10 tomorrow, which will be a lot more refined because we'll have Monday Night Football information. We'll have snap shares. We'll have a little bit more injury news and that kind of thing. Some guys that I want to touch on real quick that are not in my top 5, maybe they're in yours, but we've talked about them in the past, or they're 30 to 40 to 50% rostered. I just want to make sure that if you guys know that these players, Roschon Johnson, Tajay Spears, Justice Hill, Chuba Hubbard, both Chargers wide receivers, Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson are playing tonight, so make sure that those guys are rostered as well. If they're available on your waivers, those guys would be high priority ads as well, but they're not included in my top 5 because they're either highly rostered or, whatever the case is. So make sure Roschon, Tajay, Justice Hill, Chuba Hubbard, and both Chargers wide receivers are rostered in your fantasy football leagues. I'll kick things off with my number 5, which is Devin Singletary, who we already talked about, outsnapped Dameon Pierce this week. Do I think that's going to keep up all season? Maybe not. This is more of like a speculative ad. I don't think this is somebody that I really want to just pick up and throw into my lineup right away. But the usage, you guys can see it on the screen there, 32 plays to 21 plays for Dameon Pierce. He got more early down work, especially too, which is the key thing. Because you might be thinking, oh, maybe it was a negative game script, and maybe Devin Singletary had most of the pass catching work, but A, they were winning like the whole game, and B, he got more early down work than Dameon Pierce. And the split on third down was actually some Mike Boone involvement as well. So it's a weird situation. It's not something that I love with the Houston Texans, and I don't know if we're ever going to get like a guy, bell cow dude that emerges unless there was an injury. But I think Devin Singletary is worth, a 0 to 5% fab bid this week.
Yeah. I mean, he's actually my number 4 pickup of the week, like you said, with the usage. He worked ahead of course, Dameon Pierce this past week, like you said, the 32 snaps, the early down work that we saw, basically like not a 50-50, but got 3 of the 8 goal line opportunities as well. Do I want to throw him in my lineup? Like you said, absolutely not, because I want to at least see what Dameon Pierce looks like moving forward. But at the same time, if this usage continues, I think you can start him with top 30 level confidence on any given week. And especially given the fact that bye weeks are going to be coming up, injuries are absolutely riddled this week, like we mentioned at the top of the show. I think Devin Singletary has to be a pickup. In terms of fab, I'll talk about it, more specifically in the video, but I think baseline of 10 to 15% at this current point is about where I'd be willing to bid.
Yeah, I mean, and the percentages are going to get higher and higher because we're getting deeper into the season. But 0 to 5 fab bucks is probably what I'm looking for in like a standard 100 fab type of league. Yeah. Like you said, maybe that's 10 to 15% of your remaining budget or whatever. So I'll let you get into your number 5 because I already talked about mine. Who is your number 5?
Yeah, so my number 5 is actually Craig Reynolds, running back of the Detroit Lions. Fab 10 to 15% pending the Gibbs news. This is just speculative based off Gibbs suffering with that hamstring injury right now. If Craig Reynolds has his backfield to himself, I'd be willing to raise him on this list. However, I just kind of want to monitor the status of Gibbs before I'm willing to spend way too much on Craig Reynolds, because I do think if Jahmyr Gibbs does get cleared, Jahmyr Gibbs should be treated as the running back 1 on this team, which is why he's at 5. Otherwise, if Gibbs was out and David Montgomery was out, you can make the argument that he's top 3.
Yeah, and I tend to think that is what's going to happen, which is why Craig Reynolds is my number 2 this week. So Craig Reynolds, you guys can see the usage there. When obviously David Montgomery was active for like a portion of this game, so it's going to muddy up the usage, but he pretty much got everything under the sun in terms of like 2-minute drill, all plays, early down, short yardage, whatever. If Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are out this week, he is an RB2 in your lineup, which is why I think he's the best ad or one of the best ads of the week, because I think a lot of people are going to be dealing with injuries. There's going to be a lot of people that lose, specifically David Montgomery, maybe Christian McCaffrey, maybe whoever, and they have to find somebody off the waiver wire to straight up throw into their lineup. And that's what I think Craig Reynolds brings to the table. Even if Jahmyr Gibbs is active, I think we're talking about a flex play. Maybe multi-week injury for Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not been traditionally the guy that gets the ball in the red zone. I think that we have a very good chance for a touchdown with Craig Reynolds.
At the same time, they're also playing the second-rated defense in terms of defensive DVOA this upcoming week. So it's not like he has a prime matchup, even if he gets the backfield. That's kind of what I'm baking in as well. Again, I think Gibbs is going to be back. I think it's going to be a split backfield, and it's going to be going up against the Ravens, who, like we mentioned at the top of the show, are number 2 in terms of defensive DVOA. That's why I kind of docked him a little bit. And plus, too, I just think the top 3 guys that I have here are just guys I want on my team moving forward. Number 3 for me is Michael Wilson, wide receiver of the Arizona Cardinals. I'd be willing to bid up to 15% of my fab on him. We saw a rookie wide receiver get 88% of the snaps, run 41 routes, which tied for the team lead. And I understand the targets weren't quite there this week, but he was very efficient on them. He produced 62 receiving yards on those 4 targets, 3 receptions for 62 yards. I personally want to get ahead of the curve right now because we're getting a full-time young wide receiver on an offense that, while isn't, a powerhouse offense, top 15 offense in the league, has been better than expected for the majority of the year. So with Michael Wilson, I think he's going to be a fine, wide receiver 4, top 45-ish level wide receiver. And again, moving forward, we want to bet on those young wide receiver profiles because like we've seen in the past, rookie progression isn't on a linear curve. It's exponential. And if he keeps proving that he can earn this amount of snaps, this amount of production on his on the routes that he's running, I think he can be a sneaky league winner down the stretch.
Yeah, so for me with Michael Wilson, he didn't actually make my top 5.
Wow.
He's playing well, and he's got a 1.83 yards per route run after this week, 71.1 PFF receiving grade. Those are good numbers for sure. Yeah. I'm just not excited about ever throwing this guy into my lineup, realistically.
Sure.
And I think your point is fair. We have a lot of injuries. It's possible that people are going to need some starters at wide receiver. I personally prefer Wan'Dale Robinson, who is my number 4.
Oh, I didn't think he qualified.
So he does. He's only 18% rostered right now across all leagues. So I have Wan'Dale Robinson as my highest wide receiver on this list because I do think he's the best pickup among wide receivers this week. 8 targets, took all 100% of snaps out of 11 personnel and some out of other personnel groupings as well. He is the best Giants wide receiver, in my opinion, from a talent standpoint, from a usage and an involvement standpoint. Saquon is back in the offense, which makes it a little bit better, makes it a little bit more functional. Even though Daniel Jokes is probably not going to be out there for a couple weeks, I would imagine, I still think Tyrod Taylor is going to use Wan'Dale Robinson a lot. So if you need a bye-week fill-in PPR guy, in standard leagues, I probably wouldn't touch Wan'Dale Robinson with a 10-foot pole. But in PPR leagues especially, I think he's fine.
Yeah, no, I agree. For the record, I didn't think he qualified. I didn't think he was only owned in that amount of leagues.
No, he's literally not. Nobody wanted to pick him up. And even like the PFF article that Nate Janke writes every week, he's like, in deeper leagues, he's worth it at. I'm like, I think he's like a viable flex play right now, to be honest.
Yeah, for the record, if I were to put him up, he would be up there. So I'll make sure I add that for tomorrow's video. But very similar type of archetype, slot wide receiver, a lot of volume is what my number 2 represents. Josh Downs, wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts. Fab, I'd be willing to bid up to 20+% on him at this current point. He has already established himself as the clear wide receiver 2 on that Colts team. 49 of the 60 routes, 8 targets on the 51 pass plays. Obviously, Michael Pittman's going to be the alpha there, but Josh Downs showing this target commanding ability, playing the routes that he has already in this onset of the season. I just want to bet on a young player that shows that. We already had him as a very good talent, top 5 wide receiver for us both in the pre-draft cycle coming into the season. And the fact that he's already earning this type of role in the team is very encouraging moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like I've honestly said Josh Downs' name a million times on waiver stuff. So I honestly just didn't include him because I've already talked about him enough. Fair. But he is technically within the parameters for how much he's rostered. So yeah, he would probably be like my number 1 ad of the week, to be honest, if he was available on most weeks. And maybe I should probably just not think about how much I've talked about players. But yeah, Josh Downs definitely a solid option. First touchdown, good usage, good target share. Hopefully the Colts can play better because they were pretty shit in this game against Jacksonville. My number 3 is somebody that I saw mentioned in the chat. And someone said, is anybody encouraged by Michael Mayer? Absolutely. I'm encouraged by Michael Mayer because you guys know, if you were following us in the Dynasty offseason, I thought he was the best tight end in the class. And I didn't really care that he wasn't a freak athlete like Sam Laporta and like Luke Musgrave and like Dalton Kincaid and all these guys, because he was the most productive tight end in college and it wasn't even close. Like, we're going to put up the profile on paper of Michael Mayer versus Brock Bowers. And the fact that that's even a conversation is pretty insane to me. So with Michael Mayer, 81% of the snaps this past week, 66% route participation. And the reason, like, that doesn't sound great, but he was in a tight end committee before this. Like, you guys can see the percentage of offensive snaps heading into this game
Yeah.
was like 50-50. They were running a lot of 12 personnel. They were using a lot of Austin Hooper. And this week was the first week that Michael Mayer outplayed him, outsnapped him, and out-targeted him. So with Michael Mayer, he was a tight end 5 on the week. He had, I think, like 75 yards or something receiving. He had a couple big plays.
6
He
targets.
showcased the ability of the player that I saw at Notre Dame, who has been the number 2 graded tight end in my prospect grades since Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, no, he's phenomenal as well. I always kind of downgrade the onesies in these videos. I always usually have them in like the 6 to 10 range, because for the most part on the waiver wire in your bog standard one quarterback leagues, people are just kind of looking for the flex down. So he's technically my number 6, but man, you know how high I am on Michael Mayer. He showed that he can play 81% of the snaps this week. He showed that he could be a top 3 weapon on this team. And like you kind of mentioned, as a prospect, he was a crystal clean projection. Although there was, some concerns about his athletic ability, I think they were widely overblown. Like, just give me somebody that can command targets and can move the chains, like Michael Mayer has shown basically since he stepped onto the field at Notre Dame.
Yeah, he was only a 70th percentile athlete, only 70th percentile,
yeah.
because, Sam Laporta was a 96th percentile athlete. Luke Musgrave was a 98th percentile athlete. Dalton Kincaid he didn't actually test, but he probably would have tested really well. And then Darnell Washington was like a 99th percentile athlete. Nobody cared that Michael Mayer had like a 34% target share his final year at Notre Dame and had a higher PFF receiving grade than any tight end in the country outside of Dalton Kincaid. So, he definitely, honestly, if you need a tight end, if you lost somebody, or, maybe you have Freiermuth coming off of bye and he hasn't really worked out for you, or maybe you had Cole Kmet, and now that Justin Fields is going to be out, you can't really use Cole Kmet. I think you can make the argument that Michael Mayer is the single best pickup of any player on the week.
Yeah, no, I don't hate that, especially given, like you said, the complexion or the complexion, the landscape of the tight end position right now. But I'll let you take it away with your next one. Is this your number 1, or do you have any other?
This is my number 1, because Reynolds was my number 2 and Mayer was my number 3. So my number 1 is probably the same player that you have, or the same players that you have. I have Jordan Mason as my number 1. Elijah Mitchell, of course, is also a viable ad. This is going to be challenging to parse through, and it's kind of giving me PTSD to the DeMercado, Keontae Ingram situation last week. But this is kind of the rundown of what we're looking at with the 49ers backfield. So obviously this completely hinges on Christian McCaffrey's health. If Christian McCaffrey is fine, I probably wouldn't even add these guys. But if Christian McCaffrey is set to maybe miss a game, or maybe miss a couple games, like we said, he has a week 9 bye, Jordan Mason has a 92.5 PFF grade the last 2 years. So he has been really, really good. Elijah Mitchell has barely been able to stay on the field despite not really getting a whole lot of work. But Elijah Mitchell this past week was active for the first time in 2 games, and he played 5 snaps to Jordan Mason's 2 prior to Christian McCaffrey getting injured. When Christian McCaffrey got injured, however, Mason played 15 snaps compared to Mitchell's 2. So it's a really strange situation. I think heading into the season, we would have said, who is Christian McCaffrey's handcuff? All of us would have said Elijah Mitchell, right? We literally all would have said Elijah Mitchell, but Jordan Mason has outplayed him, and he's been a lot healthier. So I think I want to go with Jordan Mason. If I have, let's say both of them are available in my league, which both of them are actually in my home league right now, I would spend probably 20 to 30% of my fab budget on Jordan Mason, and probably only 5 to 10% of my fab budget on Elijah Mitchell, and kind of just see who I get. That's pretty much where I'm at with it. And I would prefer Mason.
I agree with that. That's exactly how I viewed it as well. Mason outsnapped him, got the leverage situations realistically when it comes to both the 2-minute drill, when it comes to, of course, the early down work, 7 to 6 advantage there. He's also, like you said, just looked like by far the better running back to start the season. Now, obviously, Elijah Mitchell's been battling injury, but even when he's gotten his touches, he just hasn't been efficient compared to what Jordan Mason has been. And yeah, I mean, it's San Francisco for crying out loud, man. Like, if Christian McCaffrey misses time, whoever is labeled as the RB1 on this team is going to be a top 12 level option. Like, there's no way to beat around the bush here. Again, I expect it to be a committee, whether it's Mason leading it or Mitchell leading it. It's probably only going to be like a 60-40, 65-35 at the best case scenario. However, 60% of the San Francisco 49ers rushing work is extremely valuable in fantasy football, because although it's not going to be Christian McCaffrey league winning level, 65%, 60% of the San Francisco rushing work could probably levy you into 15 to 18 points per game, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on the same page with Jordan Mason as well. I think he's the guy that I'm willing to spend up on. I'm a little nervous because, I hope we get some Christian McCaffrey news before I have to do that, because if Christian McCaffrey is not going to be out, then you're probably going to waste some fab budget on him. I see Hawk, when he asked, is anyone encouraged by Michael Mayer? Dark City says, no, he's too slow. 4.7 flat at 260 pounds after producing what he produced at Notre Dame. I could care less how fucking fast the guy is, because he plays fast, and his 40 time doesn't really mean shit to me, because like I said, other than Kyle Pitts, prospect wise, this is a guy that after Brock Bowers comes out this year is going to be like my third highest graded tight end to last like 5 draft classes.
And like, I get it. People talk about, the athletic ability, this and that. And like you said, it's very overblown considering the fact that he was literally a 70th percentile athlete. But worst case scenario, let's say Michael Mayer isn't much more athletic on the field than Jason Witten. Jason Witten was still a top 5 tight end for the first freaking between 2009 2013. It was a top 5 tight end 6 years in a row, 100 plus targets every single year. Like, it's not bad when you have a tight end that can just go out there and command targets and move the chains, man. Like, and I understand, like, it's more so an opportunity cost standpoint. Once you start having to pay up like a top 3 to 5 price, that's one thing. But when you're getting Michael Mayer off the waivers, when you're getting Michael Mayer as the tight end, maybe 18 in best ball coming into the year, that's completely different, because he's getting the targets. Top 5 for you is valuable. If you take a tight end in the top 5 and it gives you a tight end 5 season, that's when it's not valuable.
Yeah, from a dynasty perspective, you could make the argument that, hey, man, Michael Mayer is going to vault his way all the way up to like tight end 4 in dynasty or something like that.
And maybe
like,
you sell him then.
That's when it gets a little bit challenging. But for sure, I'm all the way on board with that. And I mean, his RAS score is like almost exactly the same as Mark Andrews, and that was literally my comp for him coming out of Notre Dame. So I really don't care about his athleticism at this point in time, because, like I said, he plays fast and he plays good and he gets targets, and he's done that all of his college career as a freshman, sophomore, and junior. Came out as an early declare, good athlete, but not a great athlete, and he's already doing it in the NFL at tight end, a position that, even though Sam Laporta is doing it, is notoriously hard to come into the NFL and produce right away. And already it's week 6, and Michael Mayer has outproduced and outsnapped a very solid veteran who's had a top 5 season in fantasy points per game before, in Austin Hooper.
Yeah, no, 100% agree there. We'll rattle off some of the comments. We're pretty much done with the waivers right now. We both agree clearly that whoever starts as a running back for the San Francisco is going to be the number 1 waiver. Farmer Will in here at 11-11. Wow. Good morning. Need Herbert and Palmer to outscore Keenan by 9.5 points. Any news on Palmer if he'll play tonight? I believe it was so he hurt his groin, I believe, on Saturday. He aggravated his groin. There was some question marks whether he would play yesterday. Apparently, all reports today are sounding like he's going to be playing in this game. So Herbert and Palmer to outscore Keenan. Like, I think you can make the argument that Herbert could outscore Keenan by 9.5. So I think he should be in a decent spot there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know if we're going all the way back up to the top. I was just gonna skim through the comments and see if anything kind of stands out to me, because we are going to get through a lot of comments on tonight's thing here. So
for sure,
a lot of talk about Trevor Lawrence. Like I said, it doesn't sound too serious. Apparently, he's just day to day. I see Claire says, is Sam Howell maybe good? I mean, what does he have, like 6 touchdowns in the last 2 games or whatever? He's definitely been pretty solid. Couple other questions here. Nothing really standing out here. We got Shopke saying Mayer was a top pick. They'll try and use him. Yeah, I mean, the guy was borderline first round draft capital. And I also wish that the Bills would use Kincaid, although he was out for this game with concussion. And yeah, like Laporta is doing some crazy shit right now. So we should not compare other rookie tight ends to what Laporta is doing, even though they were all in the same draft class. And I would have said before the draft that Mayer was a better prospect. The way that he's, produced in the NFL so far is just unlike any tight end we've frankly seen since like Mike Ditka, to be honest.
Yep. Real quick, by the way, I see this. I understand it. Mondays are like the overreactions. You let it go. But no. Bijan Robinson is honestly.
He had 21 opportunities and like 8 of them were targets, right? Isn't that what his stat line was? Like, dude, you give me 8 targets a game from Bijan Robinson. Like, the guy's going to be like a top 5 running back all season. I don't care.
That's just factually incorrect, because Puka also commanded a 33% target share in the same game that Cooper Kupp commanded a 43% target share. So
it's just these 2 guys and everybody else in that offense, pretty much.
And then he had a bad game. They're going to be volatile because they don't throw the ball a ton in the majority of matchups. And Devontae Smith also has to share the pie with both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert on that team. So for a team that's not going to have, a top 5 pass rate, it's just going to happen in terms of low floor.
Yeah, agreed.
Just
Yeah,
wanted to
that's
address.
Devontae Smith will be on the wide receiver trade targets page. Absolutely
100%.
will be. He's going to be one of the best trade targets in fantasy right now. And
100%.
also, this is a good point too. Like, who would you rather throw into your lineup? Like, if you're screwed at tight end and you have nobody, like, would you rather be playing a low end option like Conklin or Ertz or Higbee or somebody like that? Like, yeah, give me a guy like Michael Mayer or Luke Musgrave who at least has some upside to see spike usage and see these breakout games.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so about the 115 mark again. Appreciate you guys for joining us. Make sure to tune in to tonight's stream when we go through, the game preview for the Cowboys and Chargers, and then of course tomorrow, Daniel will have you covered with waivers. I am going to be doing a rest of season rankings tier list on Tuesday or Wednesday. One of those 2 days will that be out. So definitely stay tuned for that. I'm sure a lot of you guys are curious about that kind of stuff when it comes to like who's equal in trades and who's a tier up in trades and that kind of thing. That will be very valuable. So stay tuned for that on Tuesday. But with that being said, peace out and we'll talk to you soon.